my name is Hunter, the movie reviewing pony, because when it comes to cinema, humans cannot be trusted. The time-honored tradition of making a movie out of a video game. How is it that all of these go wrong? Alone in the Dark had Uwe Boll behind the project, the Doom movie didn't know what the BFG and BFG 9000 stood for, and the Super Mario Bros. Movie was the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Oh, and don't get me wrong, they're still doing this. The Hitman movie last year? Oh, more like, please hit me, because I don't want to live anymore. Turning a video game into a movie has never, ever ended up right. Ever! The most you get out of it is a somewhat okay movie. And that's if you do a really good job. Honestly, the whole thing baffles me. I mean, not one of them can be considered a masterpiece. And I mean, not a single one. But there was one that showed a lot of promise. Ratchet and Clank. Just Ratchet and motherfucking Clank. For those of you who are completely unaware, which should be none of you, Ratchet and Clank is a series of video games that started back in 2002. And it was awesome. The first game was good. The second game was great. The third game was absolutely amazing. The fourth game... the fifth game... Oh god, why would you? The sixth game, I think they pulled that out of the depths of hell. The seventh game was fantastic, though. They've got back with Insomniac, and ratings skyrocketed. The good trend sort of continued all the way up until into the Nexus, where, well, they just sort of stopped for a while. But regardless of the direction that it took, Ratchet & Clank has always been really big over here at Headhunter Productions. Except these two. We've always hated them. So, you can imagine our reaction when we saw the announcement for the Ratchet & Clank movie. Yeah, we were excited. Well, actually, excited was an understatement. We were beyond that. I don't even know what that word would be. So, the Ratchet & Clank movie. Good or bad? Of all of the video game tie-in films, this one showed the most promise. It's also worth noting that it was delayed for literally a year. A year! I don't know how things like this get delayed for an entire year. Trailers for this were actually few and far between, but started at around a half-decent time. They actually didn't start picking up until the E3 press conference. And actually, that was before they delayed it a year, so I guess the trailers technically started early. Now, before you guys ask, I don't take points off for delaying a movie for a year. If there's a delay that long, chances are you're really doing something to fix something, so take your time. But the thing is, the history of video game movies more than speaks for itself. They're all terrible. Literally, all of them are terrible. But on the other hand, this one's fully animated, which means that a lot more planning and a lot more effort had to go into it. And that was the thing. This is a fully animated movie, whereas every other video game tie-in film isn't animated. So I was looking at this like, maybe there's a chance for this one. It doesn't look half bad, and it's Ratchet and Clank. You can't go wrong. Not to mention, Insomniac was holding a pretty tight leash on the project. And regardless, it's a Ratchet and Clank movie. So, yeah. I was excited for this. Really, really, really excited. So, you're probably wondering, is it good? No, it isn't. Okay, it's not a bad movie, but it's not a good movie. This movie is actually just okay. And that's not exactly a bad thing, but it's not exactly a good thing. It's just okay. It does a great deal of things correctly, but it, on the other hand, does a great deal of things wrong. But to be fair, I don't see why the critics are bashing it so hard. And that's not the Ratchet Clank fan in me saying that. I legitimately don't see why they're bashing it so heavily. I'm talking 1 out of 5 stars at 19% on Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, no, I have to defend the movie on this because it's not that bad, okay? You give shit like Gem and the Holograms a review score like that. This is leaps and bounds ahead of Gem and the Holograms. Why don't we start by going over what this movie actually does right? Okay, for starters, this movie looks really good. That's another thing that a number of critics brought up, is that the movie looks like shit. And honestly, I don't see that. This movie looks very good. You guys can say whatever the hell you want, this movie actually looks fantastic. On top of the visuals, this movie also sounds really good. The sound design is fantastic, and the audio mixing is pretty good. Honestly, I have no complaints in the AV department. It's very good in that sense. And the soundtrack? Well, that's not bad either. It manages to convey the feeling and not overpower everything else at the same time. So, again, pretty good. I honestly don't see any problem with the audio-visual department at all, despite the fact that that was a major complaint from every other critic. I was reading stuff how it could only capture a person's attention for about 15 minutes before you start drifting off. I don't know what you're on about, but this movie had my full attention. On top of this movie is funny. I mean, really funny. Like, it actually got me to laugh at a Wilhelm scream. Come on, that's hard to do. And at the same time, while it's funny, it actually manages to maintain its serious tone, which is something that the Ratchet Clank games have always been able to pull off really, really well. And if you can capture that feeling, then, well, you have my attention. There's always been humor in Ratchet & Clank, it's not gonna go anywhere, and it's integrated very well. You can actually feel the writing from the original games pouring through into the movie, and if you can pull that off, well, then you got something going for you. Not to mention, this movie manages to keep itself grounded very well. They got the original cast, there's crates lying around everywhere, there's weapons in this movie from the actual games, and on top of it all, they got the same writer who wrote the Future trilogy, which a lot of people say was the highest point in the Ratchet & Clank franchise. And another thing that's been popping up in my reviews a lot recently are events that happen by pure coincidence. There isn't that much of it in this movie. What they do in this movie, they do based on the knowledge that they have. As in, we know the person's here, so let's go after him because we know he's here. I don't think I should give points for that, but I'm gonna, because I've been seeing it a lot recently. And the fact that this movie didn't do it is honestly a bit refreshing. Not to mention, it's energetic and flashy, there's plenty of fan service, it keeps itself grounded, and the acting holds up. So yeah, what this movie does well, it does very well. And I can't hold that against it. And before you all go nuts, it's worth noting that I really like this movie on a personal level. As a longtime fan of the series, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. And overall, I think that's who I'd recommend this movie to. I'd recommend this to a fan of the games more than I would someone who's just trying to get into the series. And this is where we're gonna start getting into what this movie actually does badly. And I have a list. The script for this movie seems a fair bit dumbed down than what we got with the games. I suppose it's to try and appeal to a younger audience, but I don't know, it just feels off. On top of this, the action scenes are a little lackluster in a Ratchet & Clank movie. The action scenes are a little lackluster. How do you screw up an action scene in a Ratchet Clank movie? Okay, I get it. You wanted it to have a PG rating, but why did you have to tone down the action scenes and everything? You're a Ratchet and Clank movie. Why would you do that? There is not a single game where Ratchet isn't shooting a gun. I don't know how you can screw that up. Also, on top of this, the celebrity voice roles, a bit underwhelming, honestly. And this is a movie that got Sylvester Stallone. I didn't even know he was in the movie until it said so in the credits. And on top of it all, this movie, it's a bit of a mess. It's really a bit of a mess. There's some shots that shouldn't be there, some scenes that shouldn't be there, some bits that don't make sense, and overall, it's kind of a mess. On top of all this, Trick's plan is a little bit vague. It also might be a little bit too short, and you can see the betrayal in this movie coming from 50 miles away. On top of it, some characters don't need to be here, and it feels a little bit rushed. And overall, it just makes up for, again, it makes up for a bit of a mess. And overall, it feels more like an expansion on the series, and doesn't really reveal anything new that we already knew about the characters. You know what? All of these flaws weigh the movie down. Really badly at that. Ratchet & Clank, I love ya, but my final verdict on this movie, 7.5. 'Cause, honestly, it's not fantastic. But on the other hand, I will give it this. I personally, now this is my personal opinion, not my professional opinion, personally, I love this movie. To me, this is one of my all-time favorite films. But that's because I'm a long-time fan of the series. Overall, I'd recommend someone play a couple of the games before they go into this movie. Either play the new one that just came out on PS4, or watch our full playthrough of the first game over on our gaming channel. But as a long-time fan of the series from the first game nonetheless, I absolutely love this movie. So for the first time here on Hunter Reviews, I would like to present to you my personal opinion on this film. 9.5. But that's speaking as a longtime fan of the games. If this is your entry point into the series, I really can't recommend it. Now don't get me wrong, what this movie does, it does very well. But overall, it's a mess. And you know what? It's a damn shame, because I really wanted this movie to be good. I wanted this to be the movie that broke the cycle in video game movies. And again, in this movie's defense, it's leaps and bounds ahead of all of the other video game movies out there. To me, this is the best video game movie ever made. And I know that really isn't saying much, but look what we got to work with. From what there is out there already, this is actually a pretty decent movie. But again, it's just okay. My advice, approach this movie at your own risk. But if you're a longtime fan of the series, you'll enjoy this movie. Just be sure that you know that this movie isn't for everyone out there. My name is Hunter, and this has been a Hunter Review.
There once was a guy who created a machine, a thing that would take people to and from some other world. And when he arrived, he had run into a pony who smiled and decided that they both should go see a film. When that movie sucked, they decided to join forces, and then they created a new show called Hunter Reviews.